Welcome. I'm your host, Terry Yoffe of Try Coaching. I help clients meet their challenges head on so they can remove the barriers that keep them from realizing their talents and strengths. You can learn more about me at trycoaching.com. Let's start a conversation. Be surprised. Not all lawyers are in it for themselves. Have a listen as to what Carl Shawn Watkins has to say.
We don't change our thinking because of what's thought of us. We don't change our actions because what people will see of us. So when you get to the core of the vulnerability piece, it's the mind to change. Well, I know that's right, so I'm going to do that regardless.
There's always one person in the crowd that's not afraid to stand up and say, no, wait a minute, to the norm. That person is Carl Shawn Watkins, lawyer extraordinaire who calls himself Mr. Vulnerability. Carl is speaking up and out in the legal industry. His mission, passion, and purpose is to create a new breed of lawyers that believe true leadership is not found in the absence of vulnerability, but in the courage to embrace it. Have a listen and why he believes everything you want is on the other side of vulnerability. Welcome, Carl Shawn Watkins. What a wonderful, wonderful honor it is. We talked about your being on my podcast last year, and we finally made it happen. So welcome. How are you today?
I'm doing great. I appreciate you having me on. I've been looking forward to it for quite a long time. Also, I am a big fan of what you're doing and the different things that you're doing as well, especially with leadership and having these dynamic people to talk to. Man, it must be a pleasure.
That was exactly what inspired me to become a podcaster. Shaking in my boots was all about having the opportunity to talk to so many amazing people that are doing such incredible things, making an impact in their corner of the world, right? And that was one of the impetuses that really put me on this path. And you are right. Every one of them, each different, each bringing something else to the table, has been an inspiration for me as well. Tell us a bit about how you got to where you are.
I really call them like the four pillars of my life. And that began with me being molested as a child and moving from that to holding a lot of anger, and with that anger, not really being able to talk about it, especially in me being African-American and in our community. It's definitely way back in those times in the early 70s. This was not nothing that was talked about. And it was always the secretness of what goes on in the home stays in the home. So that really added on to that. So I had to find an outlet. A lot of that outlet was sports. I played sports, heavily into sports, reading and writing. I became really a good writer, writing stories. Some of those exodus kind of tools I used to get out of what had happened to me. But also there was a dark side of that. Came with the being depressed all the time, always looking for something to aid me. That became alcohol, and that became those things, and staying in that depression state. That was the second pillar. And that got to the third pillar, which I said was me trying to commit suicide. And me thinking that without all of these things and not being able to talk to people, the weight was heavy. And I often sympathize and empathize with those now that go through those and say, a lot of people say, well, how can you commit suicide? All you got to do is talk to somebody. I've been in that point where it's so heavy, there's no one to talk to. And you've just got it figured out that without you, everything will get better all of a sudden, right? Some of us get to that point and we never think about it. Some of us get to that point, actually try and fail like I did. And I think my epiphany came with the fourth pillar. I was in the military, 19 years old in Germany, and I had a gun. All of us had guns, tank commanders, and we had 45s as our weapon. And I tried to shoot myself like 3 times, and it didn't go. Thank God it didn't, because we're at this point
For
now.
sure.
But I felt like such a failure even in that moment. And I just screamed out. But as bright, as dark as we were in the forest, couldn't see eyes in front of each other. The only light was really the lights from the tanks. And it just shines so bright in that forest. And I don't know if anyone else saw it. And to this day, I don't know. And I never knew. But I just felt this warmthness of love at that point. And I always call it my fourth pillar because I think that was really my first inclination of being felt loved by God and being felt with such a warmness. I couldn't stop crying. It was uncontrollable. And from that point on, I kind of saw a lot of the things that have happened to me as lessons that I need to share. Now, most people don't get from that point to this point. It usually takes a lot of things involving, but I kind of what I would call like on a campaign, being vulnerable, understanding that it was people dealing with things that I was dealing with. They were not able to share them. And not all the time sharing the darkness of what I went through, but being able to empathize with just the losses that people go through. And that just related over into the work world, and it just related over into my consulting, and now it's related over to the advocacy of being a lawyer. It's the same thing.
So from your epiphany
Yes.
of there's something else, and maybe it was the universe speaking out, how did you get from that point to law school to then becoming a lawyer that is now creating change in the world, the legal profession, by working with lawyers to help them become more vulnerable?
I think the aspiration was, it really first began in the careers that I embodied. Even from my first job, my first real job out of the military with Lockheed Martin, just a lot of I wouldn't necessarily call them injustices, but what I would say were just some of the things that I saw that was brushed over or not talked about and not explained. We're talking about a 23-year-old and, just coming out of the military where everything was like whoever told you, regardless of the color you do, to going to you working with people trying to build merit. And you can see with your natural eye the favoritism, the things not going your way, how your merit is not taken, given credit for, those kind of things. So it was kind of like shell shock, so to speak, when that first happened. And I said that if this is this obvious to me, someone who's just beginning a career, I'm sure these people that have been working years and years see this as well. So how can we address this without ruffling feathers? And that's why I really just started writing. That's where the writing came in. And I just started writing about vulnerability. And that word stuck with me because that's really what I felt at that point on that tank. And that's really what gave me an embrace. So I was dealing with, if I be vulnerable, I'll get that embrace. It didn't always happen like that. A lot of times it was put to some dangerous points, but it gave me a roadmap and it gave me a flow chart as to say, how can I use this? When can I use this? Who to use it with? And how to use it effectively to show others that it works. And I think that was my greatest part of that. And I said that the biggest fields of all the fields I've worked in, I worked a lot in finance because I'm just a whiz with numbers. So I worked a lot in finance and mortgage in the beginning. But law was always on the crust of what I wanted to do. But I saw it was so hard to get into those arenas. I wouldn't necessarily say fairly, but I would see that the playing field was not to my advantage. And a lot of that was to misunderstanding and not communication. A lot of that was to prejudice that were passed on that people never knew anything about. They just heard about and they just took it for law. And a lot of those things really propelled me to say, this needs to change. And maybe if I started, someone will pick it up, someone greater than I. Or maybe if I started, someone will jump on board and say, oh, you got something there. Let's work with that.
So this is fascinating, truly. I know that you're very much involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And is that also part of your emphasis in working with your clients? And what type of clients do you have? And how do you work with them? And how do you go to bat for them?
I think the greatest thing, especially with being in the capacity of knowing the law and understanding the law, you have a greater understanding of how the world works that others don't. You just do, because you know the intricacies of what's able to be done and what can't be done. And I think a lot of the world in general are at a disadvantage because they don't know the law. And then most of the times, and what I've come to realize and understand, that a lot of those that know the law having, I guess the best word I can use is like an uppityness about them because they know it and you don't. And therein lies, you get the projections of the attorneys being sought at and looked at as those kind of people. And I wanted to change that perspective. I really wanted to change the dynamic of where in the legal profession, there are those that maybe not be on your level, but can understand where you are and empathize with where you are and not necessarily see you as a statistic that don't understand the law should be working for you and not against you. And I think when you open up the vulnerable path to that, which is the push that I get a lot of attorneys, traditional minded attorneys to think about how things make you feel at where you are and just amplify that based upon someone who has nowhere near the knowledge, capacity, or ability that you have. And when you do fair assessments of, wow, there's a really big difference. And I think when you look at that from within, not all attorneys like that, and I have had a few that tell me, yeah, you're crazy for trying to do stuff like this. This will never work. But I think they told some of the greatest inventors that things wouldn't work and they continue to process. So I think if you can open the door to some, and especially now, I think a little bit more to our generation, the younger generation that's below us, I think they're looking at things through different lenses than we have, or their fathers or mothers or grandmothers or grandfathers. They're looking at it. You can even see it with the relationships. You can even see it with how things are intertwined. You can even see it in some of the discussions that's being had in those arenas. And I think it's only a matter of time, if we don't run out of it, it's only a matter of time where those things are going to be making changes for everyone involved.
What type of law do you do?
I work in family law, which is called drama law, but it's drama. It's drama, but it's sad. And the diversity piece in that really works at me because a lot of those, I guess you can break it up in haves and have-nots. A lot of those that have-nots lose. And it's a shame to see because you know their situations, you've read about them, you've heard about them. You may even have someone in your family or someone that you know that's dealing with that. And they have not a lot of options. And I think what we have to do is to start working toward getting options to that. It's not handouts, not freeloads, not those terms that have been used before. But I think the wisest thing that you can ever do is, I think I've heard it's a Bible fable. I don't know if it's true or not. You know, you give a man a fish to eat one day, teach him a fish to eat for life. I think that caveat works well with everything. If you share the things that you know to those that want to know it, I think growth will be had. And I think that's a lot of what we go through. Systematically, I deal with a lot of minorities who have been in the system. System hasn't worked for them. They need an advocate. I call myself not necessarily an advocate for the law, but I call myself an advocate for helping them understand it, for helping them understand how it can work for me, what disadvantage am I at, and how do I get those resources to do or work with those disadvantages. And I think if we look at it that way, we'll be able to help more than we're helping now, for sure.
How many lawyers that you know, obviously not the world,
yes,
are in your corner that really understand the DEI, that understand that there is the haves and the have-nots, for sure, and work to help create the change that you are hoping that you are doing and hoping others will continue to do as well?
I think that's a twofold. The first part you said there, that how many do I have? And it's a lot. It's thousands, right? Then you had the caveat of answering the second part of that are willing to give that assistance. And that's where the drop-off comes. And that's where it begins. Because it's the fear of being seen. We still haven't passed that stigma. As long as Brene Brown has been writing books and facilitating workshops and, building this vulnerability and leadership kind of like kingdom, there still are millions of people who don't subscribe to it. And there are millions of people who want to or are really capable to or capable of making some change in it, but they're fearful of it. They're fearful of how they will be seen, how will that affect maybe their bottom line? How will that affect the way they do business? How will that affect them getting clients? And I think it's just a risk that a lot of them just aren't willing to have. And that's the sad thing, because they're in a place to take that risk, and they're not. So it's often like when you go to get a credit card and you're high risk, sometimes the bank don't want to fool with you because you're high risk. It's not so much as you're not a great person, not so much that they even take in consideration that you may have had some downfalls in a period. And now this is where you are. That's not who you are. This is where you are. But those opportunities aren't given to those. The rich get richer. And that's a term that's been around way before I got here. But it is exactly true. When you have something, there's more opportunities for you to get more. When you have nothing, there's less opportunities for you to even gain something. And there's something wrong with that system.
Absolutely.
And that's colorblind. That's really colorblind.
So a sensitive question.
Absolutely. I love those.
Do you find that there's equal footing for Black lawyers as well as white lawyers? Or do you feel the balance kind of where the Caucasian white lawyers won't take that, whereas Black lawyers might be willing to do it and are in a position to do it, but they also won't take it?
Yes.
So,
and it's amazing that you brought that up, because that's really the dichotomy that you deal with. You deal with those traditional, that's established, that, the 40 or 50-year law firms have been around forever, passed down through dad, granddad, sons. I mean, I've been in some of those arenas where, we're just through stuff, we're too clout, we're wearing our Joseph A. Bank suits, and, this is what we're going to do. And then you have some minority ones that's on the grind, they're trying to make a name for themselves, but it's taboo to them because they're trying to build and get to where they have to build. So you really have to have, I think the greatest things you have to, I don't have a fear of loss. And I think when you get to that point, because you're talking to someone who said they was going to take their life over some problems that happened in their life that didn't define them, but there were things that happened to them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So when I've overcome that and that is behind me, I don't fear loss of things. What I fear loss of, people on LinkedIn, when I feel lost of people reading my posts, I don't do it for them. I do it for the ones that have no one to do it for them. And I don't even know who they are.
Mm-hmm.
But I put out what I put out based upon the readership that I think people needs to know about. And yeah, I get a lot of, you'd be surprised how many DMs I get for some of the posts and some of the things I put on LinkedIn, and they're not always pleasant.
Oh, wow.
They're not, you would think they are, right? Saying some of the things I say, but they're not. I mean, I've had some that tell me, who do I think I am? I'm Mr. Goody Two-Shoe. I was like, I go back to sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. I go back to that because that's the immaturity that I'm dealing with. But you have those that, and I've had a lot of them stand to me, and I'll stand with you. I'll give you, I'll provide for you, but I can't be the face. And that's fine. I could be the face. I could be the face of that. And I have some said, man, I agree with everything you say. Yeah, I get a lot of those. So they won't comment on my post, but they'll DM me. Man, I've been saying that for years, or this is how I feel. And I said, and my only question would be, why don't you express it? Why don't you express it? And a lot of them, they tell me, I just can't, or my job like this, or my manager's like this, or my, these judges I work for like this. And it's just a fear. I often see, the biggest fear I see, and just take it a little bit to the political. The biggest fear I see is a lot of things that the politicians see, and I'll just use Donald Trump, for instance, because he's a big name, right? A lot of the things he done, other people know may have been wrong. But how many people are still behind him knowing he done wrong? That's the fear. That's the kind of fear that I deal with. People know that they want to say that, and they know that that's right to say that, but they fear the repercussions if they say that, or they fear what will they be thought of if they join forces with that, or if they put their face to that. And it's a real fear. I mean, I don't discount it.
Wow. And here you are. So
yeah.
In one of your quotes, you talk about is the legal profession is undergoing a transformation, the way leadership is perceived and practiced, and embracing vulnerability, which is what you are advocating for, is not, of course, a sign of weakness, but it's actually a strength in
It
a
is.
lot of ways. And, as a coach, I get that also with clients, that they are very fearful of vulnerability. So if you're advocating your one man, maybe more, how long do you think this boat is going to take before it starts to change course, so to speak?
I don't know. I looked at it. There are shifts in our paradigms that allows those things to come. I first started talking about vulnerable leadership, I think way before Brene Brown did, at least on the level of being, talked about. I talked about that as a 25-year-old working for Lockheed Martin, a big military money base with very few African Americans working for it. I really talked about some of those things back then. So I'm talking about from 91 to over 30 years now that I've been talking about. And it took the pandemic for my door to be open. So we say pandemic's been around since 20. So we say 27 years it's taken me for someone to hear some of the things I'm saying. So when you look at it on the time frame of that, will it take another 27 years? I don't think so, because I think the ball has been rolling. The pandemic set us in a place where no one was powerful. That is about one of the things that has ever hit this entire world totally, that put us on an even plane. Whether you was rich or not, you couldn't go out. Whether you had money or not, you couldn't buy and sell. Whether you was the richest ones, you still was quarantined. It affected this whole world as an equal.
Right.
And I think in that we got to see and hear, especially from a LinkedIn standpoint, for something I was a member of since 2008, no one had ever put anything posted on as far as being vulnerable on LinkedIn. But when that pandemic hit, vulnerability from people, whether it was staying at home from work, homeschooling the kids, stress of both spouses at home all the time, people were actually starting to talk about those things, looking for avenues or looking for exits to kind of talk about those things. And I said, oh, that was my door. So I just poured on. And then I just did it from a leadership standpoint. I did it from the point of, how would this feel at your jobs? If your bosses were able to have these kind of conversations with you, how much more would you pour into an organization if they really, really felt about you the way that you're talking about them? How would that dynamic be for your boss to understand, if they knew a little bit about you personally, that they would be okay with you having a meltdown or having some days to yourself? Those kind of things. It took the pandemic for people's eyes to get open like that. And that's why I said maybe you have to be a shift. I don't know what the next shift will be. Preferably it won't be nothing dynamic or where it hurts a lot or it takes a lot. But I also think in the midst of us giving or getting, something has to lose. I said earlier about the life and death prospect. Something has to die to give birth
to something else.
So if it's our attitudes, our ways, it's how we think, those things have to die for us to make change.
Last year on my podcast, I had a woman named Abby Hayes, and she talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace of leaders, and where were leaders in bringing on people of diversity. And here we are a year later, I'm talking to you, which no coincidence. And you're also creating change in how the legal profession looks at diversity, equity, inclusion. And so when you say vulnerability, what do you mean by that? Because people probably have very different ideas.
When I speak of vulnerability, I speak of mind to change, because that is the core of vulnerability. We don't change our thinking because of what's thought of us. We don't change our actions because what people will see of us. So when you get to the core of the vulnerability piece, is the mind to change. Well, I know that's right. So I'm going to do that regardless of area agrees, because it's right to do. And that's what I like at vulnerability. That's why I always put in my posts, and I make sure I put them in there. Vulnerability is not a weakness. It's a great sign of courage, because it takes a lot to not go with the crowd. And we have those few. where we have King, we have a lot of different ones that pick it up and say, I'm not going to do it that way. We're going to do it this way because it's the right thing to do. And when do we get that moral compass? We get it when we're vulnerable. That's when we get the moral compass.
That's very interesting. And I think also during this time of the pandemic, there was a lot of the great resignation of people leaving and people, again, changing their mindset because they realize they don't have to work in a toxic environment.
Yes.
They don't have to work for leaders that don't listen or don't care. And that certainly was an awakening. So today, leaders are being held accountable.
Absolutely.
For what they want their company to be like. What do they want it to look like? So in a way, and that's not everybody.
No.
But that's vulnerability, having the wherewithal to change a mindset, even though it's not what most people would consider doing, and making that shift because you personally understand that there's a different way to go and that this country, this world deserves that kind of change.
And it does. And it became formidable where we became empowered. Now, the funny thing about that and the ironic thing, I guess I should say, to make it sound even better, that we held that power all the time. People held that power to say, I don't want to work in this environment. But it took that shift. All of us that look and see things change, even the leaders, even the ones that owned, even the ones that had their names on all the billboards that were the owners. We working for them, and all of us that work for these corporations, we had the power all the time to say, I'm not going to work in this kind of environment. And you say, that's how people do people. We put people in areas regardless of whether the social skills, the equity, the inclusion, all of those things that we know should be given preference. We put them in environments and say, you know what, regardless how smart you are, this is where you're going to be. And it takes those to break out of those areas to say, that's not where I'm supposed to be. And that's how I think about vulnerability. You get to that point and you get to that crux in your mind and say, how can I make a change? That's a question I ask myself. How can I make a change? And sometimes being a voice can make a change.
Absolutely. How do we create change?
Yes.
It's right. Create change. And it takes one person.
That's all.
One person to start the ball rolling, even though you don't see your rewards right away. They're there. Somewhere they, boomerang back. Have a quote. Everything you want is right on the other side of vulnerability.
Yes, that's my life quote.
Tell us a little about that. Everything
you want is on the other side of vulnerability. When you, as I said, as my core meaning of vulnerability, when you have a changed mindset, everything you want is on the other side of that change. And that change could be any capacity in your life or which you want to change. And once the change is made, it enables you to have access to so much more. But everything you need is in you. So if you can build on you for you, it's right on the other side. And if I can get others to see that and believe that, I think there's more so believe that. Some people say they see it, but they don't know how to get there. That's really what I go through a lot. They see it, they know it's better for them, but they don't know how to get there. And a lot of them is just terrified of even going there, afraid of. Right. And those are kind of like the mixture of what I get and what I get to talk to. And when I explain some things to them and I say some things, or I take their situation and I say, what if it was this, that? You could just see their lights in their eyes twinkle. And I never thought if I did that, maybe this will be that. Because we're confined to thinking, a lot of it I shame our parents on. We're confined to thinking the ways we think because that's what mom and dad said we should think. Whether it was, and they just did what they thought. They just did what they thought.
Right.
Where there was, I want you to do this. My mom did it to me. My mom's a CPA. You know what she did to me growing up? She narrowed my career to computers or math. She said, in the future, if you go into computers or accounting, you'll always have a job. Now, when she said something that was good and motherly and caring about my future, absolutely. But what she also did was deny me the fact that I can fall in love with many occupations that has nothing to do with either one of them and still be successful. And see, as parents, we don't see that caveat. We just see the narrowness of, I want to make my child great. And these are the things I think they will be great in. But the child had that. And I said, when I have my children, I have two, and they're in totally, my son picked up math and he loves it. I didn't force him down there. He's studying for his CPA. And my daughter works with kids with autism. So they work with, and they do things that they want to do that loves them. And I think that being a parent of that, that is really where we've gotten a lot of kids that are now adults that can't deal or make decisions or let others make those decisions and are fine with living with them because they're still carrying what I call the parent effect. Mom and dad directing traffic as a kid, and you never outgrew that. Everybody doesn't fall into it, but majority do.
It's interesting. I just did a quote and verbiage on my website. One of the greatest tragedies of life is living the life that somebody else scripted for you.
Isn't that a tragedy?
We grow up a lot of times with our parents' belief system.
Yeah.
And either we change it and we become mature, or we don't and we live someone else's life. And that's...
And then we wonder why we're never happy. You have so
that's
many
exactly right.
adults.
I loved that you were able to define vulnerability and what it really means.
Yes.
It's all about opening your mind, making that change. You know, Brené Brown is every day getting up and going into the arena and fighting, being a warrior. And even if you fall, go back the next day, living your life like that. And a lot of people won't and don't because of fear, because of what they're going to get backlash. So they don't. You are certainly one that has.
Yeah.
What are one or two tidbits that you could, not that you haven't had them all along in the conversation, that you can leave our listeners with?
I think the number one, and it's one that I leave everyone that even says hi or bye to me, believe in you. If you don't believe in you, you can't expect anyone else to. In expecting someone else to, you can't blame anyone for not. So you have to believe in you. And what that defines, you say, oh, Carl, that could be so broad and that be so wide. It's really not. Just believing in you. I'm not talking about your capabilities. I'm not talking about the things you know, the things you don't know. Believe in you, who you are, and apply all those things accordingly. I had to believe that I was more than the molestation, alcoholism, the depression, and the attempted suicide. I had to believe that I was more than that. What I thought I would be, I don't know. But I believed that I was more than that. So in that caveat that I leave to others, believe in you. And the second part about that, I would say, find out who you are. Find out who you are. It's important to find out who you are. Take some of them systems that you grew up with, some of those things that you've been applying to your relationships, your life, your family, your bringing up, your parenting. Take some of those things and shake them up and say, was I really doing this correctly? Or have I been carrying on a tradition that's been detrimental to my growth because mom said it, because dad said it? And I'm not parent bashing. I'm a parent myself. But we have to be aware that sometimes we feed into our children seeds that gets watered along through society, and they become those ones that we're not proud of. And you say, well, I don't know what happened to you. You were such a good, yeah, but you told me this. And society watered that, and I became this because I never took any thought about who I could be.
Very great pieces of advice. Yes. So as creating change, in Carl Shawn Watkins' own words, everything you want is right on the other side of vulnerability. Open your mind, Go for what you want and you will create change. Carl, this has been
Yes.
very
it's been lovely.
informative. I can't
was worth the
thank
wait.
you enough. Thank you very, very much.
Yes.
Take
Thank
care.
you. Thank you too.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts. When was the last time you had the courage to speak up about something knowing your idea would fall on deaf ears? I bet you learned that allowing yourself to become vulnerable comes at a price that many people aren't willing to take. I am hoping that this compelling and extraordinary conversation with Carl Shawn Watkins offered you thoughts on how you can create your own changes by making choices that matter to you. Thank you for joining the conversation. For related content on extraordinary work, please visit my website, trycoaching.com. Always remember, when you work with passion and purpose, your work can become extraordinary. Would you have the guts to walk away at the height of your career? Meet my next guest, Michelle Rios, a successful executive for more than 2 decades that did just that. She traded in the comfortable and predictable for the uncomfortable and unfamiliar in order to find her own extraordinary life. And now she is helping others do the same with coaching and her podcast, Live Your Extraordinary Life.